Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen here with you. So that brings us to quarterback, which brings us to offensive coordinator. Which one do you want to do first?
I guess, I mean, they're probably they're like connected in this weird like snake eating its own tail type thing. So I'm sure we're going to talk about both.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Simultaneously.
Yeah.
So
I got to pick a graphic though. Do we want to go offensive coordinator, quarterback?
Let's go offensive coordinator.
All right. What do they do as at offensive coordinator? And that's, that really is a huge question in terms of what we were just talking about philosophically. Do they want to be a team that runs something similar to what they did last year, but better? And also, we talk about the quarterback stuff, like I've kind of thrown out Cliff Kingsbury as like this profile of former head coach that could actually be interested in a one-year job kind of thing. But also, if Sam Howell is your quarterback, a guy who did a lot of RPO stuff in college, do you want someone like a Cliff Kingsbury who runs a very RPO system? Do you want someone more from, like we've talked about, the Tennessee-Atlanta tree that's outside zone? That way you get a lot of run, a lot of play action off of it, and insulate your quarterback that way. Like, there's so many different directions that you could convince yourself could work. And also, I think then you get into the profile of, do you want someone with experience? Do you want someone who's like a fresh new mind? What kind of staff are they going to be able to hire? Like, are you hiring someone that's coming in and inheriting the rest of the staff that Scott Turner leaves behind? Also, there's now reports that Kenny Zampese could be in the mix here as the OC. And like, what kind of offense does he run? Is it that same like Norv Turner system, just tweaked and perhaps called better? Is that just all you want? So there's a lot to chew on here, even before you get to who's going to be operating it as the quarterback.
So I think there's this tendency amongst fans and amongst analysts, me included, to kind of say, "Oh, whoa, where are they going to go? What's going to happen?" I think you got to look at what Ron has historically done. I think he's going to find somebody that he's worked with before, that he's comfortable with, that knows this system. And I think one of the reasons the knowing of the system is so important is because there's this year parameter going into 2023. It's a year. So you don't want to install a whole new offense. You don't want to have that yoke around your neck because, like I said before, even really good OCs, Kyle, Sean, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniels, when I talked to him in San Francisco, 3 years to learn and actualize an offense. You don't have 3 years. You have a year. So you have this offense, and you need someone who knows this offense and that someone has has worked with before, that understands the terminology, the verbiage, and understands Ron's philosophy. All of a sudden, that list gets really short. None of these kind of big name guys are on the table because they're going to come out and want to run their own offense. They're not going to learn someone else's offense, right?
Right. So all your West Coast guys are out.
Yeah, right. All the guys in Atlanta, all the guys in Tennessee, right? Ron has always been a gap scheme run guy. Like, he's going to get a coach, a coordinator, run game coordinator who is a gap scheme run guy, right? So the name that pops out to me is Shula up in Buffalo. Like, that one has been thrown around a little bit, and I think he's worked with him before. He knows this system. I do like the fact that he's been with a winning organization, an organization that, is working with Josh Allen, has brought a quarterback along. There's been quarterback development there. We saw what a Buffalo staffer can do in New York. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one, but I think like having that experience brings credibility, brings viability. The problem is, like, he can't interview till they're out of the playoffs, right?
Well, right. Because I was just trying to think, like, they didn't get the 1 seed. And so because of that, those coaches, there's got some window somewhere. I think. I mean, I think it depends. Maybe not. Maybe it's only if they go to the Super Bowl the week between, like the off week. Right. Number 1 seed coaches, I think, can interview this week. Like, I know Kansas City's got a couple of guys that are interviewing, like Steichen from Philly is interviewing.
Right.
But I think you're right. It's either out of the playoffs or until you have like a week where you're not playing.
Right. So I look at that and I say, like, that to me seems like the most natural fit. But obviously, again, you're limited by time. But if you're pretty confident, like I'm sure Ron's got his number, they talk and they say, "Are you interested?" And you can kind of start planning around it. And that's one name. Ron's been in the league for a long time. He knows a lot of people. So does Norv, right? That tree is not as prolific as it once was, but it's still around, right? So can someone there? That's Shula's the big name that comes to mind. I'm sure there's others, and I got to do some research before our next pod to find some other names that fit that criteria. But that is what I'm looking at, and obviously Zampese fits that by criteria by default. But I do think you want to bring something new partially because of all the feedback Ron was getting from the players about a lack of confidence in offensive philosophy. So I just think bringing in a new voice, new perspective will help with that a little bit. And even if it's the same stuff, just a different perspective, different voice. And I think that, to me, that seems like the right decision. It's just about kind of in that very narrow window of the available candidates that fit that criteria, who's it going to be?
Yeah. How similar is the system they run in Cleveland?
That's a really compelling thing. So that is actually, from what I understand, he is a West Coast tree guy. He's like a Kyle tree guy. Now they get to their outside zone stuff differently because Bill Callahan is the run game coordinator. So
Mhm.
there's a heavy influence of Bill Callahan with like that pin pull stuff. They do run some outside zone. They're really good at it actually. So like, and then they do a lot of duo and kind of gap scheme stuff as opposed to tight zone. They're more like this. They're outside zone and gap scheme as opposed to outside zone and tight zone.
Right. So one of the names that's come up in the last 36 hours, just kind of kicking around names that'll probably get hired somewhere.
Right.
But talking to Robert Mays on the radio show the other day, and also this guy's interesting as we transition a little bit to the quarterback conversation, is Drew Petzing. He's the quarterbacks coach in Cleveland, a former tight ends coach as well. So he's got a little bit of expanded knowledge. He's had some interviews last year. But
for OC.
So talking about him is interesting because what if Jacoby Brissett is one of the quarterbacks you're looking at, right? And so that's another impact on this OC conversation is like, who is the quarterback that's actually at the helm next year? And if you're going into the season with Howell as your default QB1, like, yeah, getting Zampese, who worked with him closely, seems like a good idea. That relationship has a lot of value and not having Sam learn another offense. But there's also the thought, like if all of a sudden you decide after you do all your season review stuff that your new quarterback is going to come from college, then, there's maybe a little bit more expansive of an OC search because you are going to teach the quarter. Now, of course, that's only one player, right? Terry and Curtis and, your O-line, whoever doesn't have to learn a new offense. It's just your quarterback. But that is something to consider. And if you were to go with a guy like Petzing, let's say, and you bring in Brissett, where your quarterback at the very least knows the offense. And by the way, they operated at a top 10 efficiency level with Brissett at quarterback this year, which is nuts. Mostly by running the football with Nick Chubb, but like they operated at a really high efficiency level. Then that could be a really interesting choice where you bring in a veteran like Brissett, you let him battle with Howell, and basically when Howell's better than Brissett, he's a pretty solid NFL starter, and you roll with Sam from there.
Yeah, I actually would love that fit here, like that type of guy, someone from again, we mentioned Cleveland in addition to Atlanta and to Tennessee, right? Like, because they are kind of that same philosophy, and I think that's what Ron wants to be here. The problem is, I'm pretty sure Drew Petzing's going to want to bring his own verbiage and terminology. Now, I have been in systems where, like in Atlanta, Kyle left. They hired Sark to replace him, and Sark had to learn the offense in Kyle's language, right? He had to learn Kyle's offense and call his offense, which is hard for coordinators. Like, you need to be really smart, you need to be very dedicated, you need to really push that envelope there. And I'm not sure if I'm a young, talented OC, like, why do I want to deal with that, right? I want to go to a spot where it's like my show. I can run my offense, I can call it the way I want to call it. And I think that's something that some is going to weed away some of these higher quality candidates, I think, right? Because they're going to be like, why do I want to deal with that parameter?
Yeah, I think you're also kind of already eliminated some of those guys, though. Like if Shane Steichen's the number one guy on everyone's list, well, I guess Steichen's really more of a head coach, but whoever the quarterback coach is in Philly, I'm forgetting his name. But he's going to be an OC somewhere. He's number one on everybody's hot name list, right? He's not coming here because of the ownership stuff that we've already talked about.
Right. No, I think that's 100% right. So again, it's these names are like, I'm excited. Like anybody from Philly, I think would be great. I think anybody from, like I said, Atlanta, anybody from any of these organizations that we've talked about would be great because they encapsulate the philosophy that we want. They're going to execute an offense that has been very successful, and hopefully they're offensively innovative enough to kind of evolve to fit the personnel here, right? The problem is that takes time, and you don't have time. So you need to kind of that time parameter, I think, is a bigger deal than people want to acknowledge. So that's one reason why I think you want to kind of stay with the same offense as much as you can if you're Ron. So again, it takes away some, like, again, this Drew Pettis guy would be great. He'd be a fantastic fit here. I'd be fired up. It's exactly what you're looking for. But the problem is, if he comes, he probably needs to bring a new run game coordinator. Like, you need the staff overturns, and can you get a good run game coordinator from that same tree, knowing that they're going to be out of here in a year? Like that, that year parameter is really limiting what you can and cannot do. Even Shula, like, Ron probably has a great relationship. They've worked together before. Am I leaving a really good situation in Buffalo for not a sure thing in Washington just for a year? It's tough. They're gonna have to really kind of sift through some stuff here and try to find the best candidate if they choose to go outside. And that's why I think the Ken Zampese thing becomes, I don't want to say more viable, because I still don't think that's nothing against Ken Zampese. I think he's a really smart guy, but I just think you need to bring in a new voice. And so where is that new voice in the offense? And that's my kind of thought on that. And it's just gonna be hard to get guys in, I think.
Yeah, on the run game side, Randy Jordan is one of the only holdovers from the previous staff that Ron kept, and I would imagine that Ron would like to keeping Randy Jordan. And obviously Jennifer King is someone who's a rising star in the league in a lot of ways, for the work that she's done and the help that she's given to Robinson and Gibson, and her reputation is stellar as well. So that's going to be an interesting mix and match on that side of it. I will say this. If I can't get this thought out of my head, and it's the rare time where Craig's going to be the optimist. I think that there is a really compelling case to be made for someone who, again, is a bit of an opportunist, but if you can come in with this skill position group, and it really comes down to how much do you like your quarterback situation, which is, as we'll talk about in a second, not the easiest thing to like here, right? They have a 5th-round rookie who played one really good game that's very impressive, high upside, and that's the only quarterback on the roster, and you are not going to be a priority destination for any of the big names that become available. It's just what it is. And you have a middle of the 1st-round draft pick, right?
Yep.
So you're not in a good quarterback situation. But if Drew Petzing from Cleveland loves Sam Howell in the draft, he's like, man, if I was in charge, we would have taken that dude in the 2nd round, right? Mm-hmm. And you think that kid plus Terry plus Jahan plus Curtis plus Gibson plus Robinson plus the young tight ends, you're like, well, since we're not going to spend a lot of money on quarterback, we got bukus of money to spend on O-line and a 1st-round draft pick.
Right.
I think I can make this offense average 28 a game.
Yeah.
Then even if Ron gets fired, you might be in line to be the next head coach here or somewhere else. And so I do think that there is a version of this where someone is going to be like, there's too much opportunity here. Now, as you said, that list becomes very small if Rivera's like, I need someone who knows the system, knows the verbiage, has maybe worked under, we should do an extensive Google of who's in the league now that worked under Norv Turner and came out of that tree. That list gets small. But I do think that's intriguing.
I don't disagree that this is a good opportunity, but it takes away your top candidates, right? It takes away your Cliff Kingsbury's. It takes away the dudes from Philly. It takes away those dudes at the top of the list, because they're going to get legitimate. Not that this isn't a legitimate coordinator spot, but they're going to get 3 years under a new regime to do what they want to do, right? And that's not what this opportunity affords. So those top guys, I think fans need to just say, are gone, quite frankly, because even though this is a very compelling opportunity, especially given all the reasons you said, it's going to be someone a little off the beaten path. And I think that path, if I'm Ron, I'm thinking, who do I know that can kind of just keep this on the rails? Everyone knows the verbiage, everyone knows the system, and see what happens. So that's why I think that. I could be completely wrong. He could go in a complete direction, but then that gets messier for the year transition. And it's like, do you want to get that messy for a year, or do you want to kind of say, let's keep it as tight as we can, let's keep the offense the same, let's let everybody know the same offense, and let's just try to hit this out of the park with a young quarterback after we upgrade on the offensive line?
Right. All right. That brings us to quarterback. Who is the Commanders' QB1, and how do they pursue that person in 2023?
So I really think they're going to give Sam a look. And obviously, what is it? Today is Thursday, so this is like
It's
4
Thursday,
days.
January 12th. Mark this down for quarterback prediction 1 of the offseason. We should do a montage by, whenever it is
That's
the
a good
season
idea,
starts.
actually. So I get the vibe that they're want to see what he's got, and I think endorsements from guys like Taylor, endorsements from guys like Terry are going to be a big part of that. And it's funny how like all these people who were very quiet about Sam in season are now talking about him a lot in this very grandiose way. So I'm always a little bit dubious about that in terms of information, but I do think that is a good sign. I think it's a good sign that he performed well in the game. Was it perfect? No, but was it good? Yes. And now all his teammates are kind of saying, you know what? We like Sam. We like what he's got. We like his physical tools, blah, blah, blah. So I think Sam was going to get a shot. If Sam's getting a shot, you need someone else on the roster. That could be Taylor Heinicke, right? It could be Jacoby Brissett, who I kind of like a lot.
I like Jacoby Brissett a lot.
Like an Andy Dalton type guy,
Yep.
That type of guy. A guy that's good, that has been a backup, that can mentor a young kid, help him grow. And then when it's time to transition, they're not going to be making a stink in the media because they know the score and they're going to be pros about it. You're going to pay them a lot to do that. So I think if that, given the notion that Sam seems to be the guy today, 4 days after the season ends, look for a veteran who can win you some games if Sam doesn't develop the way you thought he would develop is my thought. And until I hear something else, like they fell in love with the kid from Stanford, right? The quarterback from Stanford who will be available at 16. Like, I think that's the direction they want to go.
To me, first round pick seems a bit silly. Unless you look, unless you,
like I'm saying, I agree. Yeah. Unless you love,
if you love someone, look, there's been quarterbacks that have gone teens, 20s that have been awesome. 30s. And sometimes, obviously down the list, your Breeze in the second round. I mean, on a different level, your Cousins and your Wilson, down the list. Obviously, Brady was a 6th rounder, one of a kind, but he exists. Somehow still in the NFL at the age of 46. He's like 12 years older than you, isn't he?
No, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And you retired 3 years ago after a 10-year NFL career.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Anyway, the way this stacks up, maybe I've just got super optimistic view of everything right now. I actually kind of like the way their offseason sets up if they execute, right?
Yeah.
Where they can spend low money on quarterback with a Brissett, with a Dalton. We're talking $12 million or less. Have a high upside play in Howe. A solid quarterback in a system which, Lord willing, is insulated. And the quarterback doesn't have to do a ton. And then you can spend your first-round pick on offensive line. You can spend a buku of money on offensive line. And then you can spend your depth stuff on, like, your depth picks, your second, third rounder on down the list. So I guess you don't have a third right now because of the Carson trade. But you spend that stuff on the corner depth and some of the other stuff that we're talking about. And maybe even you get out ahead of some things. Obviously we'll see what they do with Payne. We'll talk about that in a second. But can you go ahead and extend Cam Curl now as opposed to playing the game you did with Payne, and then next offseason you're like, oh crap, we have to sign Sweat and Curl. So there's a lot of stuff that we'll get to as we go here today and moving forward on some of these cap gymnastics that they need to do. But the thing is with this team, they have the resources available to do the things they need to do. They just got to get it right. And that's the hardest part, is getting it right. But they're also looking at positions that are not as competitive. Like, everyone's looking for quarterback because everyone's always looking for quarterback. But they don't necessarily have to push quite as hard there, where they can push harder at guard. They can push harder at right tackle if they want to kick Cosme inside, or, at both guard spots if they want to obviously bring in someone that Chris Paul is going to need to beat out that's a little bit more established. Right. So there's these. I actually like how that sets up from that way.
It feels good. It feels like it's a very manageable thing. It feels very manageable.
As manageable as it can be when you are like, oh my God, we don't have a quarterback. Unless you think that Sam is your guy, then I guess you do kind of have a quarterback.
But I'm optimistic about Sam. I mean, and we'll see. Like, it's really early, but like I think the running ability, the arms talent. If you go out and you say we are going to turn this offensive line into a top 10 group, that becomes a much more tenable solution. Now,
Definitely.
can you get there? It's tough, man. It's really hard to get there, in an off season, but teams have done it. Kansas City a couple years ago, I think that was 2020, the offseason of 21 going into 21 season. They went out and invested big. They hit on two guys in the draft, and that's been like 1-2, 1A, 1B with Philly for the last year and a half. So like you can do it.
Is there another Kelsey brother?
Yeah, right.
That's apparently what you need on your team.
Yeah, it's seriously just to get a good old line. Absolutely. So I think, but they got to hit on it. They got to do a good job of that. And we'll talk about the draft briefly here in a second. But like, there are things there that make you say, okay, they can get there.
With that said, all that said, I think we're on the same page. We agree with the plan. Don't spend a lot of money. Compelling case made by Robert Mays with me the other day that Derek Carr would be a really good option. Not at his current price.
Right.
But assuming Vegas moves off of him, or was willing to eat some of the salary, if you can get Derek Carr in the 25 to 30 range, does that interest you?
I'll buy that. Yeah. 25 to 30. If you can hit him there, like, and everyone says 25 to 30, like, think about that. A middle tier quarterback is $40 million. So if you can get him $10 million cheaper, I'd definitely kick the tires on that. Because if you get 2021 Derek Carr, like, he's going to elevate the hell out of this roster. He's going to elevate the hell out of the offensive line. The problem is, if you get 2022 Derek Carr or 2019 Derek Carr, like, that's bad, right? That's way too expensive. But it's a bargain if you get those other 2 years in there. And I think the other thing they need to consider is they need a guy who can learn this offense, because this offense is like I have access to talking to coaches and talking some of the offensive stuff, not everything, but it is a challenging offense to learn in terms of how they call it. So we talked about how I think Carson Wentz in that area struggled more than they thought he would. Mm-hmm. So they need to make sure that guy knows it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you kind of maybe stick with Sam or Taylor, because they know the system, they know the verbiage, or a guy like Brissett, because he's learned every offense under the sun. He's been in New England's offense, which is notoriously hard to learn, right? He's been in Cleveland. He's been all over the place. He's been in Indianapolis. So there is a path there where you find a guy who can learn an offense. I think Derek's a smart guy. I think he could probably do it, but that's something else that has to be factored in here also.
No, the learning curve is something that is definitely